You won't believe who walked into my daughter's funeral, and what he claimed. The room was wrapped in silence, the kind that hums louder than any sound. Soft music drifted through the air, the kind they play at funerals when words have all dried up. I stood there, frozen, beside my daughter's casket, my hands clasped, my breath shallow, my heart cracked into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. My Beth. My daughter wasn't supposed to go first. She was only 48. An architect who could turn blueprints into masterpieces, a mother who raised 2 amazing children, and the strongest soul I'd ever known. Cancer didn't care. It swept in, aggressive and cruel, and took her from us in a matter of months. People whispered their condolences as they walked past, but I barely heard them. It felt like I was underwater, watching it all unfold behind glass, unreachable, unchangeable. Then something shifted. A strange tension crawled through the air, almost electric. And before I even turned my head, I knew. He was here. Donald. After 30 years of silence, of absence, of erasure. He walked into the funeral home like he belonged. His hair, once jet black, was now silver, styled with the same arrogant precision. He wore a tailored suit, expensive and calculated. That same confident gait. That same magnetic pull that once fooled me into loving him. And now he stood just feet away. "Elizabeth," he said, voice lower than I remembered, but unmistakable. "I'm sorry about Beth." His words hit me like ice water. He said her name. He had the nerve to say her name. This man hadn't called in 30 years. Not for birthdays. Not for graduations. Not for cancer. Nothing. "Donald," I said, carefully keeping my voice even. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, eyes scanning the room like he needed backup. "I have a right to be at my daughter's funeral." Behind me, Michael, Beth's husband, stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder protectively. The kids, Emma and Jack, looked between us, trying to place this stranger. They didn't know. Why would they? Their grandfather had vanished long before they were born. "You lost that right a long time ago," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended, but I wasn't going to apologize for it. Then I saw her. A young blonde woman standing behind him, probably late 20s, awkward, clutching a designer purse like it was armor. His girlfriend. Wife. I didn't care. It didn't matter. What mattered was the word he used. Family. He wasn't family. Not to me. Not to Beth. Not to anyone in that room. "You walked away," I said, each word landing like stone. "You were gone when she needed you most. And now you show up here." A few guests turned their heads. I hadn't meant to raise my voice. But grief and rage have a way of boiling up together when someone who abandoned you acts like they never left. Then, just as I was ready to walk away from him forever, Beth's attorney, Thomas Reed, stepped in quietly. He suggested we move to a private room. The service was about to begin. Donald, of course, insisted on joining. "I'm coming too," he said. "I'm her father. And I understand there's a matter of the estate to discuss." And just like that, it all made sense. Of course he didn't come for Beth. He came for the money that I could feel the heat rise in my chest. His audacity was unreal. The woman beside him, Melissa, I'd learn later, tugged at his arm, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, this isn't the time," she whispered. But Donald brushed her off like she was a fly on his sleeve. He wasn't leaving. Not without a fight. "Beth was my daughter too," he said louder, as if volume could rewrite history. "You shut yourself out," I snapped, no longer holding back. 30 years of silence, of absence, of pain. I let it all pour out. You chose to walk away. From her graduation. Her wedding. When she had kids. When she got sick. You chose not to be there. Michael stood steady beside me. His arm now fully around my shoulders, grounding me. Emma moved closer to her mother's casket, almost instinctively, like she needed to protect her. Jack, still just a teenager, clenched his fists quietly at his sides. "I'm not going anywhere," Donald insisted. "I have a legal right." I'm family. That word again. Family. As if blood alone gave him license to grieve, to claim, to collect. Thomas, calm and professional as ever, finally intervened. Mr. Harrington, if you insist on being present for the reading of the will, I won't stop you. But it will happen after the service. Out of respect for Beth. Donald nodded stiffly, like a man forced to wait in line for something he believed already belonged to him. I turned my back on him. I wouldn't let him see me cry. Not now. Not ever again. The service itself felt like a blur. I barely remember the speeches, the hymns, the flowers. What I do remember was the weight of his presence in the room, the way it poisoned the air around me. Him sitting in the back row with that woman. His daughter, I assumed. Melissa. Later, I'd find out she was the child he had with the woman he left me for. She looked like she could have been Beth's twin if time had been kinder to all of us. Another betrayal, tucked neatly into a well-tailored suit. When the guests had left and the funeral home emptied out, Thomas returned to my side. Elizabeth, he said gently, we're ready. If you are. I nodded, straightening my spine like armor. The reading of the will was about to begin, and Beth, even in death, had the final word. We stepped into a quiet room tucked behind the main hall of the funeral home. It smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, a strange contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Michael, Emma, and Jack followed close behind. Donald and Melissa were already seated at the table. She looked nervous. He looked expectant. Thomas placed his briefcase on the table like it was sacred. He opened it with care and pulled out a stack of papers and a cream-colored envelope with Donald's name scrawled in Beth's unmistakable handwriting. Before we begin, Thomas said, looking directly at Donald, Beth revised her will 2 months ago. She was fully coherent and very clear about her intentions. Donald leaned forward, barely hiding the greed in his eyes. So, how much are we talking about here? Thomas didn't flinch. Her estate is valued at approximately $10 million. Donald's breath caught, just a flicker, but I saw it. That twitch in the corner of his mouth. That greedy little glimmer. As Thomas unfolded the official documents, I could feel Beth's presence settle into the room. Not as grief but as purpose. She had planned this moment. And she'd made sure no detail was left to chance. He began reading. I, Elizabeth Carter, known to family as Beth, being of sound mind and body, declare this my final will and testament. Thomas listed out a few initial bequests. A fund for her children's education, donations to cancer research, specific pieces of jewelry and artwork for close friends and extended family. Then he paused. He picked up the cream envelope, the one with Donald's name, and said, Beth included a personal message to be read aloud, in front of all present, should her biological father appear. He opened the envelope slowly, almost ceremoniously. My dearest sperm donor. That's when Donald's smile cracked. If you're hearing this, it means you've done exactly what Mom and I suspected. You showed up sniffing around for money. Predictable. You missed everything that mattered. My life, my milestones, my illness. And now you want a piece of what I built. Let me save you some time. His face began to change. That puffed-up confidence. Deflating with every word. You didn't raise me. You didn't support me. You didn't know me. So let me be clear, you're not getting a dime. Instead, I've left you something far more appropriate. Thomas reached into his case again and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside, you'll find the truth. Your truth. The one you've spent decades trying to outrun. The journals you thought you hid. The evidence you thought was buried. It's all here. Donald sat frozen. I know about the money you stole from Sarah Winter's family. I know how you bailed when she found out. And I know you ran not just from us but from prosecution. From shame. Melissa gasped. Sarah Winters, she whispered. Donald didn't respond. He couldn't. His face had gone from pale to gray. You were never a father to me. But I'm leaving something for Melissa, your daughter. My half-sister. $1 million. No strings. She deserves a chance at a life untainted by your lies. Melissa was in tears now, her hand shaking over her mouth. As for you, Dad, I leave you only this letter. And the knowledge that I saw you. I knew exactly who you were. Thomas folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The silence in that room was so loud, I could hear my own heartbeat. Donald stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor. This is absurd. This is slander. She's lying. Thomas calmly replied. Actually, she provided evidence. He placed a folder on the table, thick, heavy, damning. Donald lunged toward it, but Michael stepped between them. You can't destroy my reputation like this, Donald shouted. Your reputation. I finally spoke, voice low and steady. You destroyed that the day you walked away. I looked over at Melissa. She was trembling, staring at her father like she was seeing a stranger. Dad, she said softly, is this true? Did you really steal that money? Did you lie about everything? Donald's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He had no words. But Beth did. And her voice, her truth, had finally broken through. Donald stood there like a statue, jaw clenched, hands shaking, denial barely hanging on by a thread. This is all lies, he spat, but the fight had already drained from his voice. She can't prove any of this. Thomas didn't even flinch. Actually, she can. And then, calmly, he placed the thick folder Beth had assembled on the table. It hit the surface with a heavy thud, the kind of sound that signals an ending. Inside, financial records, personal notes, scanned copies of journal entries, even a signed agreement between Donald and Sarah Winter's family, promising to never return to Boston in exchange for them not pressing charges. Beth hadn't just exposed him. She had cornered him. Donald looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. But there was none. Melissa had stepped away from his side. Michael had his arms protectively around Emma, who was still quietly holding her mother's photo. Jack stood near the door, fists balled, eyes burning with restrained fury. Then Thomas kept reading from Beth's letter. Here's what's going to happen, Dad. I've left nothing for you except the truth. But I have left you a choice. You can use the treatment fund I set up, yes, I even thought of that, or you can keep running. But know this. If you choose the latter, I've also made sure that those you've hurt can pursue legal action. That was when the investigator stepped forward. A tall man in a dark suit. Confident. Donald Harrington, he asked. Who wants to know? Donald snapped, though it was barely more than a whisper now. Daniel Webster. Private investigator. Beth Carter hired me over 2 years ago to follow your trail. There are several people, in Chicago, Philadelphia, San Diego, who'd be very interested in speaking with you. Donald went pale. His eyes darted toward the door again. Desperate. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered. You do, Daniel replied flatly. We found a pattern. Very clear one. You build lives, families, then you vanish, usually with money. Each time you leave behind a mess. Each time you start over like none of it ever happened. Melissa turned, her voice trembling. Dad, is that true? Do you really have another family? Donald didn't answer. He couldn't, because Daniel already had. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. Donald with a woman and a young boy. It was dated just 3 years ago. That's Amanda, Daniel said. Your current legal wife. And your 8-year-old son, Tyler. In San Diego. Melissa gasped. Her whole body shook. You have a son. You lied to me. Donald's mouth opened, but before he could speak, Melissa cut him off. You told me Mom was dead. That she died when I was a baby. But I found her 3 years ago. Alive. Well, living in Arizona. You left her too, didn't you? He finally spoke, a broken, desperate whisper. Melissa, I was trying to protect you. From what? She cried. The truth. Or the trail of lies you kept spinning until none of us knew who you really were. It was quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that brings peace. The kind of silence that follows a bombshell, when everyone's just trying to process the fallout. And then Jack, only 17 but standing tall like his mother, finally spoke. "That's enough," he said. "You don't get to pretend you're the one who's been wronged." Donald looked at him, maybe really saw him for the first time. "My mom wondered her whole life why you didn't love her enough to stay," Jack continued, his voice cracking. "She was dying. And instead of thinking about herself, she spent her last months making sure you couldn't hurt anyone else." Jack's words didn't just cut, they hollowed out the room. Beth's strength, her fire, her protectiveness, it all lived on in him. Donald turned to me, eyes glassy, broken. "What am I supposed to do now?" I stared at him, not with anger, not even pity, just truth. "Beth left you a choice," I said quietly. "That's more than you ever gave her." Donald's composure was in pieces now. Slumped shoulders, trembling hands, eyes darting from face to face like a man who knew there was nowhere left to hide. Daniel, the private investigator, remained calm, almost surgical in how he began to lay out the truth Beth had worked so hard to uncover. "Beth didn't just want answers for herself," he said. "She wanted to make sure others wouldn't be blindsided the way she was. So she asked me to follow the money. The marriages, the disappearances." He opened a file and began to slide documents across the table. One by one. Marriage certificates, bank withdrawals, signed leases under aliases, statements from women who described being swept off their feet, then left to pick up the pieces once Donald vanished. "In Chicago you were James Harding. Married a woman named Clara. Left her after draining half her savings." Donald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "In Philadelphia, you were living under your own name. You met Janine, moved in with her, borrowed money for a business venture, and disappeared 2 weeks before her surgery." Melissa sat in stunned silence, her eyes flicking from paper to paper. She looked nauseous. "And then there's Amanda in San Diego," Daniel continued. "Your current legal wife. Beth reached out to her shortly before she passed. Amanda had already started to suspect something. She's since filed for divorce and frozen all shared accounts." Donald gripped the table, knuckles white. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You can't destroy me with old mistakes." But Daniel wasn't done. "The most important discovery," he said, his voice dropping into something heavier, "came just weeks before Beth passed. Something she didn't share with anyone. Not even you," he said, turning to me. A chill crawled up my spine. "She found out why Donald changed so suddenly all those years ago." The room froze. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her voice just a whisper. "What do you mean?" Daniel reached into the file again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A medical report. 3 months before he left his family, Donald was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, with narcissistic traits. The doctor strongly recommended immediate psychiatric treatment. My stomach dropped. He was told very plainly that without treatment, his manipulative behaviors could escalate, that he was likely to harm those closest to him, emotionally and financially. I turned to Donald. He wouldn't look at me. "Is this true?" I asked, the words barely able to leave my mouth. After a long, loaded silence, he finally nodded. "I didn't believe it at the time," he muttered. "I thought the doctor was wrong, that I could fix it on my own. And instead of facing it," I said, "you ran." He looked up, eyes hollow. "Every time things got too real, too emotional, too hard, I just wanted to escape. I thought if I started fresh I could reset, be better. But it never lasted." Melissa's voice cracked. "So you knew something was wrong, and you still hurt all those people?" Donald's voice was barely audible. "I didn't know how to feel what I was supposed to feel. I knew what love was supposed to look like. But I couldn't feel it. Not the way others do." Silence fell again. But this time it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was crushing. Thomas gently cleared his throat and turned to me. "Beth found the report among old family files. She didn't want to burden you until she was sure. That's why she hired Daniel. to fill in the rest. Then Thomas pulled out another envelope. Beth left this one for you. Personally. My hands trembled as I took it. On the front, Mom. Inside, a handwritten letter. By now you've learned the truth about Dad. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I had to be sure. For so long I thought maybe we weren't enough. That's why he left. But it wasn't us. It was him. He was never capable of the kind of love we gave so freely. I didn't tell you this to hurt you. I told you to set you free. You never failed, Mom. You were more than enough. Always. I had to stop reading. The tears blurred the ink. She had done all of this to protect me, to protect us all, to put the truth exactly where it belonged, in the light. Even as my heart cracked wider from all I'd just learned, something shifted inside me, something like air returning to lungs that had been tight for decades. Beth had pulled back every layer, every lie, every scar. But she hadn't done it to wound. She'd done it to heal. And her final act proved that more than anything else. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house had fallen into a quiet lull, I found myself back in Beth's study. The space still smelled like her perfume, like coffee and lavender. Her desk, her beautiful hand-crafted cherrywood desk, waited silently in the corner. Beth had left one instruction in her will just for me. Mom, check the third drawer. You'll know what to do. I knelt beside it and slowly pulled the drawer open. Inside, there was a leather portfolio tied with a ribbon. On top, a note in Beth's looping script. For Mom. My final project. Love, Beth. My hands shook as I untied it and opened the folder. Architectural drawings spilled out. At first, I thought they were for a client's home. But then, I noticed the details. The layout, porch, the garden, the sunroom tucked into the back with floor-to-ceiling windows. My breath caught. It was my dream home. The one I'd described to Beth decades ago when she was just a little girl. Back when her father and I still shared Sunday morning coffee and whispered about, someday, cottage on the coast. With a wraparound porch for sunsets. A studio for painting. A garden where I could finally grow herbs and flowers without rushing between responsibilities. I'd tucked that dream away when Donald left. Life took over. Bills. Single motherhood. Survival. But Beth had remembered. And not only remembered, she'd built it. A note at the bottom of the last page. When I found out I was dying, I knew I didn't want to waste a second. I bought the land. Remember that spot we loved on the coastal drive 2 summers ago? Michael's overseeing the build. It'll be ready by Christmas. Contractors are paid. Everything's done. Now it's your turn, Mom. To live. Paint. To breathe. You gave everything to me. Now, it's your time. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She had given me a future when she no longer had one of her own. And she didn't stop there. Under the portfolio, I found a USB drive labeled in Beth's handwriting. Evidence. Curious and bracing myself, I plugged it into her laptop. It opened to dozens of organized files. Bank records, legal documents, scanned letters, images, and one folder titled simply, The Pattern. Beth had spent her final months building something beyond justice. She'd mapped out Donald's behavior like a blueprint. Trigger points, signs, timelines, everything. She'd documented his cycles. When he vanished, how he did it, and how he manipulated others into silence. And then, a folder labeled, Project Seraphim. Inside, I found the beginnings of something extraordinary. A proposal for a non-profit resource center. A place for families affected by abandonment, narcissistic abuse, and trauma. There were drafts of legal aid programs. Counseling partnerships, educational grants for single parents. Beth hadn't just exposed the damage. She'd built a path for others to rise out of it. She turned her suffering into a legacy, her silence into a megaphone. And in doing so, she handed me, and others like us, something we hadn't had in a long, long time. A way forward. The morning after Beth's funeral, the sky was clear, almost cruelly beautiful. The kind of mourning that doesn't match the heaviness sitting in your chest. I found Melissa already in the kitchen, quietly making coffee like she'd lived there her whole life. "I hope you don't mind," she said, pouring a cup for me. "I couldn't sleep much." "Neither could I admitted. We sat at the table, two strangers bound by grief, betrayal, and a woman we both loved in different ways. We talked about Beth, about the house she was building for me, about the foundation she dreamed of. Melissa said she wanted to help bring Project Seraphim to life. But before I could begin to imagine the future, the past knocked again, literally. A knock at the front door. It was Daniel Webster, the investigator Beth had hired. "I'm sorry to come so early," he said. But Beth was specific. She wanted this delivered the day after the funeral, not before. He handed me a small wooden box, its lid carved with the image of a phoenix. Inside was a letter and a silver locket I'd never seen before. I opened the letter first. "Mom, this is the hardest gift to give, but maybe the most important. The truth isn't always gentle, but it's always necessary. I found this among Dad's things when I was searching for evidence." "Open the locket. Then let Daniel explain." I opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of a baby boy I didn't recognize. On the other side, an inscription. "Donald Jr. Forever in our heart. 1991 inch." My chest tightened. "Donald Jr." I whispered. Daniel sat down across from me. "You never knew about him," he said gently. "Because Donald never told you. But this child was real. He was born in late 1991. To a woman named Elaine Matthews. Donald had been in a full-blown relationship with her while still married to you. The world felt like it tilted sideways. He had another child while still married to me." Daniel nodded. "A son. But the baby died shortly after birth. Beth found hospital records, funeral documents, and once she started digging deeper, she uncovered the truth. That loss, that trauma, seemed to trigger the breakdown that led to everything else." Melissa's voice trembled. "He had a baby, a son. And he never said anything." Daniel looked at her with quiet sympathy. "No one knew. Not even Beth. Not until the very end of her investigation." I clutched the locket in my hand, trying to breathe. "So he was already cheating on me, had another family, and then lost a child?" "Yes," Daniel said. "According to the psychiatric report Beth uncovered, the death of Donald Jr. exacerbated his disorder. He began dissociating, compartmentalizing. That's when the therapist documented the warning signs. That's when Donald stopped being able to form real emotional connections. He ran from everything. Grief, responsibility, truth." Melissa, still stunned, sat back against the chair. "And he never told me. Never told anyone." I turned to her. "Did your mother know?" "No," Melissa whispered. "She met him after all of that. He never mentioned a child. Not once." We sat in silence, the weight of this final truth pressing down on both of us. A baby that never got to grow up. A son Beth never knew she almost had as a brother. A fracture so deep that it sent a broken man into decades of destruction. Then Melissa asked, "Will you tell him that you know?" "Thought about it." "No," I said quietly. "Not yet. But I'll write him. Not to forgive him, but to acknowledge the full truth. Because Beth was right. The truth doesn't always heal immediately. But it does free you from the lies that once held you captive." That afternoon, sunlight poured through the windows like some kind of promise. Not that everything was okay, because it wasn't. But that maybe, just maybe, it could be. Michael brought Emma and Jack over to help begin sorting through Beth's things. There was a stillness in them now, but also a strange strength, like their mother's clarity had planted something inside them. I watched Emma carry a box of Beth's books, her expression determined. Jack stood by the desk, carefully organizing old architectural models, the exact way Beth used to do when she was focused. Methodical, intentional, unshakable. Melissa stood beside me, a little unsure, still hovering at the edge of what had once been my family. But I could feel Beth nudging me, even now. She would have wanted this girl to be embraced. She would have wanted us to begin again. Later that evening, after the others left, Melissa and I sat in the garden, the late summer air buzzing with cicadas and a faint saltiness from the ocean breeze. "I keep thinking about what Beth gave me," she said, eyes distant. "The money, yes, but also a clean break. A way out of my father's shadow." I nodded slowly. She wanted to give all of us that. Melissa turned to me, her voice softer. "Do you think people like your ex, people like my father, ever really understand the damage they've done?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I don't know. But I do know this. Beth didn't wait for his apology. She didn't hinge her healing on his remorse. She took back the power he stole and used it to build something that could help others." Melissa let out a shaky breath. "Then I want to help too. I want to finish what Beth started." And with that, something shifted between us. Not overnight healing, but the beginning of a bridge. 2 weeks later, I stood on a windswept cliff, watching construction crews lay the frame of the cottage Beth had designed for me. The ocean roared below, wild and constant. I closed my eyes and could almost hear Beth's voice. "Now it's your turn, Mom." Beside me stood Melissa, clipboard in hand, hair whipping in the breeze. "She would have loved this," she said, looking out over the foundation that would soon become my home. "She would have loved you," I replied. Melissa blinked quickly, brushing a tear away with the back of her hand. As we turned to head back down the trail, I took one last look at the horizon, the wide-open future Beth had carved out for all of us. For 30 years, I was the woman Donald left behind. Now, thanks to Beth, I was someone else entirely. The builder of something new. Grief doesn't disappear. Shift. It goes from feeling like drowning to something quieter. Something that lives inside you, yes, but doesn't control you anymore. Beth didn't just leave behind memories. She left us direction. Home to start again. A foundation to help others rise. And the truth, raw, painful but freeing, so that we could finally let go of the ghosts we'd been carrying. Melissa is still here. She's taken the lead on Project Seraphim, pouring her inheritance into something bigger than herself. Emma volunteers after school. Jack's working on the garden Beth designed, the one that will surround my new cottage. And me. I'm painting again. For the first time in decades, I feel like I'm living, not just surviving. Beth made that possible. She turned her final chapter into the prologue of so many other lives. So if you've ever been left behind, if someone shattered your peace and walked away like it meant nothing, remember this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you build from it. And Beth, she built something unforgettable. Speech balloon if this story moved you. If you felt the pain, the truth, or the power of a daughter's final act of love, let us know in the comments. Bell, and if you want more stories that heal, that reveal, and that remind us how strong the human spirit can be, hit subscribe. Red heart, because sometimes the most powerful justice is simply telling the truth.